Hello and welcome to this edition of World at War. My name is Mohammed Saleh. Ukraine could be facing its biggest loss in months. Russia claims to have captured the key logistical hub of Kupiansk. It also claims to control over 75% of Pokrovsk. And if the key eastern city of Pokrovsk falls, then Russia would be a step closer to controlling Ukraine's entire industrial east, the Donbas, that is made up of the neighboring regions of Donetsk and Luhansk. So as winter begins to set in, Russia has been lashing at Ukraine with punishing attacks on its power grids and energy infrastructure. And amidst this, Donald Trump has again floated a 28-point peace plan, in which Russia will be allowed to take possession of eastern Donbas, but Ukraine, interestingly, will still retain what is being described as legal ownership of the land. And Russia will pay cash as a lease for being in de facto possession of the eastern Donbas region. But what chance does this peace proposal actually have? Our next report gets you the details.
In wave after wave, Russia's missiles and drones have wreaked havoc in Ukraine. Even Western Ukraine is now facing the brunt of attacks. In Ternopil, at least 31 people were killed, including 3 children, in a Russian missile and drone attack that hit 2 blocks of flats. 93 people were wounded, 18 of them children in the strike. Early on Wednesday, one of the deadliest in the region since Moscow launched its full-scale invasion in February 2022. Ukraine's Air Force later said that Russian X-101 cruise missiles had hit the residential flats. Russia fired 476 drones and 48 missiles at Ukraine, striking energy and transport infrastructure and forcing emergency power cuts in a number of regions in frigid temperatures. So as winter looms and the Russian forces adapt their tactics, Ukrainian troops need to double down on technological innovation and flood the front line with more drones to halt Moscow's territorial gains.
It is not easy for us now. I think it will be consistently difficult. Because there is wet mud, it will be harder to drive. Tracked vehicles will be used more. But this is an advantage for us. We need to stop the enemy more as they approach on foot, so that they do not infiltrate and do not let them through. If we carry out these tasks with greater density on the front line and the enemy infiltrates less deeply, it will be better for us.
Russia on Wednesday said its armed forces intercepted US-made missiles fired by the Ukrainian military in the western Russian city of Voronezh, and the Russian air defense units shot down the Ukrainian projectiles using S-400 and the Pantsir air defense systems. Away from the front lines, Donald Trump is trying to hammer out a peace deal. He has floated a 28-point peace plan, which some sections of the Ukrainians have already described as a surrender plan.
I wanted to ask you also about this Ukraine plan.
Yeah.
President Zelensky said today that his country would risk either giving up a partner or giving up its dignity. There's been criticism that this deal...
You mean he doesn't like it?
It's unclear. He was sort of
Well,
pretending...
he'll have to like it, and if he doesn't like it, then, they should just keep fighting, I guess,
The suggestion that he made, though, was that if he doesn't accept it, that the U.S. would pull back its support for Ukraine. Is that
Well, at some
accurate?
point, he's going to have to accept something, He hasn't accepted. You remember right in the Oval Office not so long ago, I said, you don't have the cards. Don't forget, I inherited this war. This war never would have happened. I inherited this war. And I thought he should have made a deal a year ago, 2 years ago. The ultimate deal would have been if it never started. That would have been the good deal. That could have been done too if you had the right president, but you didn't have the right president.
But interestingly, Trump's peace plan has received the assent of the Russian President Vladimir Putin as a good starting point for peace.
If Kyiv does not want to discuss President Trump's proposals and refuses to do so, then both they and the European warmongers must understand that the events that took place in Kupiansk will inevitably be repeated in other key areas of the front line. Perhaps not as quickly as we would like, but it will be repeated inevitably. and overall we're satisfied with it, as it leads to achieving the goals of the special military operation by armed means through armed conflict. But, as I've said many times before, we're also ready for peaceful negotiations and peaceful resolution of problems. However, of course, it requires a substantive discussion of all the details of the proposed plan. We're ready for it.
At this moment, the Russian tactics on the battlefield have changed. Russia is relying on smaller and more mobile military units to stage its attacks, and Putin's threat is: if Ukraine does not agree to a negotiation, then more and more of the Ukrainian cities will meet a similar fate as Kupiansk.
On the 17th of November, unidentified gunmen abducted about 25 female students from a predominantly Muslim government girls' boarding school in the northwestern town of Maga in Nigeria's Kebbi state. The Nigerian security forces were placed on high alert, and the hunt is still on to nab the assailants and to rescue the kidnapped girls, one of whom has managed to escape. The very next day, in an attack on a church in the Kwara state, gunmen killed 2 people and abducted about 38 worshippers during a service that was being recorded and broadcast online. And then on Friday, in the second school kidnapping in a span of a week, 227 students and staff were abducted by armed men from a Catholic school in the Niger state in the early morning raid. So what has sparked this spate of kidnappings and counter-kidnappings in Nigeria? Our next report gets you the details.
Nigeria is battling a renewed wave of attacks by armed groups in recent days. Early on Monday, around 4 a.m. local time, assailants, armed with sophisticated weapons, stormed Government Girls' Comprehensive Secondary School in Magar town, exchanged fire with guards, and abducted 25 girls. An inconsolable Aisha Sani, whose 2 daughters were kidnapped, received the shocking news when she woke up in the morning.
Our 2 girls have been kidnapped. One was in SS3 and the other in SS2. The news came to us in the morning when we woke up and heard the story. We had heard a gunshot in the night, but we thought the shot was from the security. Unfortunately, they were not the ones. It was not until morning that we received the shocking news.
The brave vice principal of the targeted school, Hassan Yakubu Makuku, was shot dead while resisting the attackers, and another staff member sustained gunshot injuries. The wife of the slain vice principal narrated the ordeal that she, tragically, was a witness to.
As they entered, they pulled their guns to shoot him. He pleaded, "Don't shoot me, allow me to stand up." As he got up, he praised God, saying, "Allah is the greatest, no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger." He urged me not to cry and to continue praising God. I joined him in his prayers. Then they pulled the trigger and shot him. As he fell, I immediately rushed to touch him, but they pointed a gun at me and said, "If you touch him, we will shoot you."
No group immediately claimed responsibility for abducting the girls, and the motivation behind the kidnapping still remains unclear. In a search and rescue operation, soldiers, additional tactical units, and local vigilantes have been deployed to comb suspected escape routes and surrounding forests. It is to be noted that at least 1,500 students have been kidnapped in northwestern Nigeria since Boko Haram Islamist militants abducted 276 Chibok schoolgirls over a decade ago. On the streets, Nigerians expressed their outrage over the kidnappings and government's failure in tackling the insecurity in the country. A day after the kidnapping of the 24 schoolgirls, gunmen attacked the Christ Apostolic Church in the town of Eruku, killing at least 2 people and kidnapping the pastor and several other worshippers, piling more pressure on the government. Reportedly, the gunmen have issued a ransom demand of 100 million naira, or roughly $69,000 per worshipper. the most populous African nation, is plagued with security challenges on multiple fronts, including a 15-year-long Islamist insurgency in its northeast, separatist violence in the southeast, and frequent deadly clashes between farmers and herders in the central region. The challenge of this multiple-front war is daunting, especially for a frustrated and demotivated Nigerian security force for whom late payment of salaries is a recurring problem.
At least 13 people were killed when an Israeli strike hit the largest Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon on Tuesday night. The attack took place in spite of a ceasefire that was sealed last November between Israel and Hezbollah that sought to end more than a year of hostilities. Now, Tel Aviv claims that it targeted Hamas members in the deadliest attack since the truce came into effect. But the Palestinian faction has denied that it has any military installations in Lebanon's refugee camps and has called the Israeli claims to be nothing more than lies. A day afterwards, the Israeli military claimed to have struck several weapons storage facilities belonging to Hezbollah's rocket units in southern Lebanon, calling such sites to be a violation of the understanding between Israel and Lebanon. Our next report gets you the details.
Since the eruption of Israel-Gaza war on the 7th of October, the border between Israel and Lebanon witnessed near-daily exchanges of fire between Israeli forces and the Iran-aligned Lebanese militant group. After more than a year of hostilities between Israel and Hezbollah that included 2 months of an all-out war, a ceasefire deal took effect on 27th of November last year. Despite the November 2024 ceasefire agreement, Israel maintains troops in 5 areas in southern Lebanon and has kept up strikes. On Tuesday night, Israeli military struck Ain al-Hilweh, the largest Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon, located on the outskirts of the coastal city of Sidon, killing at least 13 people and wounding several others. Though the Israeli military claimed that it targeted terrorists who operated in a Hamas training compound in the Ain al-Hilweh area in southern Lebanon, the residents of the area refuted the Israeli claims.
This is a civilian area. There are no military bases. The Ain al-Hilweh camp is open, it's extremely crowded, and there is nothing hidden. The site hit is a club. It used to be a pool for children, and now that it's winter, they removed the pool and turned it into a football pitch, and children from the area come and play. It's for local residents, but anyone can go in and check what's in it. There are no weapons or anything like that. It was mostly children killed. 9 of them were below the age of 15. All of them relatives and neighbors and cousins. It's not like someone from outside the camp had come and was hit here. It's all kids from around here. 3 cousins from the same family were killed, as well as their neighbors.
The Palestinian militant group Hamas also refuted Israeli claims of military installations in the Palestinian camps in Lebanon and blamed Israel for the brutal assault on the crowded refugee camp. According to the United Nations agency, Lebanon hosts about 220,000 Palestinian refugees. On Wednesday, accusing the Hezbollah of rebuilding its capabilities close to the border, Israeli military claimed that it struck Hezbollah weapons storage facilities in several South Lebanon towns. It had previously warned residents to evacuate the area around sites in the southern Lebanese towns of Deir Kifa, Shehur, Ainata, and Tyre Felseh. Pressured by Washington and Tel Aviv, the Lebanese government has ordered its army to devise a plan to disarm Hezbollah. Israel has accused the president of Lebanon of dragging his feet, insofar as the disarmament of Hezbollah is concerned. Hezbollah, which has not fired on Israel since the truce came into force last November, has termed the decision of de-armament hasty. The Israeli war machine marches on in Gaza as well. At least 27 people were killed on Wednesday in one of the deadliest Israeli airstrikes on Gaza since the Israel-Hamas truce entered into force last month. Reportedly, The Israeli airstrikes killed 14 people in Gaza City in the north and 13 in the Khan Yunis area in the south. According to the Palestinian Health Ministry, Israel has carried out repeated strikes against what it says are Hamas targets during the ceasefire agreed on 10th of October, resulting in the death of more than 280 Palestinians. Which begs the question, will the dangerous escalation by the Israeli military end up jeopardizing the fragile truce?
At least 19 people were killed in an airstrike on a suspected rebel camp in the Colombian province of Guare in the early hours of the 10th of November. Now, the attack targeted a dissident faction of the FARC group, which engages in drug trafficking and forced recruitment of children. According to Pedro Sanchez, the defense minister of Colombia, this was one of the most decisive operations in recent years. The strikes came as President Gustavo Petro faces pre-election criticism and US sanctions for his alleged reluctance to target the armed cocaine trafficking groups. Now, Petro has said that he ordered the bombing and the military dissolution of the group, led by the country's most wanted rebel, Mordisco, after failed peace negotiations. In response to these deadly military strikes, Mordisco has threatened to disrupt the country's 2026 presidential election in a video that was released on Tuesday. While Petro has opted to engage the rebel groups in talks since 2022, critics have said that these policies have instead allowed cartels and guerrilla groups to flourish. And although Petro is constitutionally barred from running for the presidency again, these criticisms risk damaging his political allies in the next elections.
For more than 6 decades, an armed conflict has roiled Colombia, pitting government forces against the right-wing paramilitaries, left-wing rebels and criminal groups. In the early hours of the 10th of November, the Colombian military carried out a deadly airstrike against a drug-running guerrilla camp, killing 19 in the country's Amazon region. According to the Colombian defense minister, Pedro Sanchez, the camp belonged to members of a dissident group which was led by Commander Ivan Mordisco, who he described as one of the most dangerous criminals and drug traffickers in the country. Petro said he ordered the bombing and military dissolution after repeated failed peace negotiations with Mordisco.
The President of the Republic, upon learning of an imminent threat against the population and also against the public forces, authorized a bombing against the criminal structure of one of the most dangerous criminals and drug traffickers in the country, known as alias Mordisco.
During the strike, the security forces detained 3 people and freed 3 children who had been recruited by the group. According to Admiral Francisco Cubides, who is the commander of the military forces, the strikes were carried out at dawn on November 10th.
19 terrorists were killed during the military operations, and 1 was captured while injured. He received first aid and was taken to a medical center in San Jose del Guaviare, where he received proper medical attention. Additionally, 2 adults were brought to justice and 3 minors were recovered.
According to several rights groups, forced recruitment of children by these armed groups has been on the rise in recent years in Colombia, documenting how children as young as 9 are kidnapped and forcefully recruited. In a post on the social media platform X, President Petro confirmed that 7 adolescents were killed in the bombing campaign in the southern Guaviare department on November 10th. Colombia's human rights ombudswoman, Iris Marin, in a statement called on the Colombian government and rebel groups in the country to respect international humanitarian law.
Military forces must take all feasible precautions to protect minors who, even though they may have been recruited to participate in hostilities, retain enhanced protection derived from the principles of humanity, precaution, military necessity, which is strictly limited, as well as the best interests of the child.
Petro suspended airstrikes against criminal groups shortly after he came into office 3 years ago in order to decrease the possibilities of killing minors. But airstrikes against Colombian rebels resumed last year as Petro's administration struggled to contain the expansion of groups like the EMC that are fighting to take over territory abandoned by the FARC. In response to the intensifying attacks against troops involved in cocaine trafficking, which have killed dozens, Moscow has threatened to disrupt the country's 2026 presidential election in a video released on Tuesday.
We wanted the electoral process of 2026 to have as few disruptions as possible, but given the advance of warmongering actors, we have no choice but to take a stand in defense of the territories, their peace, and political decisions free from militarism and corruption. Petro, in the face of harassment from the gringos, drags Colombia into another civil and armed conflict.
The country is facing a key presidential election in 2026, and Petro's left-wing government has faced backlash for the recent string of deaths. While Colombia is the world's biggest producer of cocaine, Petro is under increasing pressure by the United States to combat drug trafficking.
On the 15th of November, thousands of Mexicans marched through Mexico City to protest against drug violence and President Claudia Sheinbaum's security policies. The clashes between the protesters and the Mexican riot police broke out in front of the National Palace, injuring at least about 120 people, mostly police officers. And according to the security chief of Mexico City, about 100 police officers suffered some injuries, of whom at least about 40 people required hospital treatment, while 20 protesters were also injured. Now, President Claudia Sheinbaum, who still maintains approval ratings of well over 70% in her first year in office, has faced criticism for her handling of drug violence due to several high-profile murders during her reign. Our next report gets you more details.
Mexico City, the capital of Mexico, was rocked by anti-government protests on the 15th of November. The demonstration against drug violence and President Claudia Sheinbaum's security policies was organized on social media by representatives of Generation Z, though protesters of various ages were in attendance. Though President Claudia Sheinbaum, in office since October 2024, still maintains approval ratings above 70%, her tenure so far has not been sans blemishes, mainly due to several high-profile murders. The most recent case is that of Carlos Manzo, the mayor of Uruapan in Michoacán state, who was assassinated on November 1st, having led a crusade against drug trafficking gangs in his town. Paying tribute to the slain mayor, protesters held banners and wore hats in salutation. The National Palace in Mexico City, where Sheinbaum lives and works, soon turned into a protest site, as protesters fed up with corruption and cartels assembled in front of it and knocked down some of the metal fences protecting the building.
All we want is justice and zero impunity in this government. We're tired of seeing investigation files opened and the government never acting, of power being concentrated across all branches and controlled by the same group.
This is one of the most corrupt governments we've ever had. A narco-government that has completely given in and that instead of defending the people, chooses to protect the corrupt and the cartels.
We're going to fight until the end. We can't allow Mexico to become a dictatorship like Venezuela or Cuba. Mexicans are fed up.
In a bid to contain the protesters, Mexican riot police resorted to using tear gas, but to no avail. A defiant crowd of young people threw projectiles at the police, who responded by deploying their shields, and also threw objects at the protesters. In addition to the injuries suffered, authorities arrested 20 people for crimes such as robbery and assault. including an alleged attack on a newspaper journalist. A couple of days later, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum blamed opposition politicians, violent groups, and a social media campaign which she alleged was driven from abroad for the protests against her government. On the 19th of November, Mexico's Security Minister Omar Garcia Harfuch said that authorities had arrested a man accused of orchestrating the killing of Uruapan Mayor Carlos Manzo earlier this month.
Análisis minucioso de evidencias.
The detailed analysis of evidence and the coordination between institutions enabled decisive progress in the investigation, leading to the arrest of Jorge Armando N., identified as one of the masterminds and a leader of the criminal cell that planned the killing of Carlos Manzo.
De Carlos Manzo.
The security minister added that the group is linked to a faction operating in Michoacán aligned with the Jalisco New Generation cartel. The Jalisco New Generation cartel engages in drug trafficking as well as kidnapping for ransom and extortion. It is also notorious for targeting public officials who refuse to do its bidding. Mexico's first female head of state, Claudia Sheinbaum, who had declared tackling drug violence her topmost priority last December, has some tough questions to answer in the face of these high-profile murders.
And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of World at War. If you want to reach out to me with any comments, feedback or suggestions, please feel free to do so on the ID that you're seeing on your screens. I'm your host, Mohammed Saleh, and I'll see you again next week.